pretty cavalier about what counts as a tale from the tube, and I've done plenty of videos about lines in London that aren't served by the Underground. Well, now I'm going to do the opposite. I'm going to talk about the Underground service that went all the way to Southend. Yes, for a time it was possible to get the District line all the way to the Seaside, and this wasn't just some crummy little service that ran for a couple of years. No, this service ran all the way from 1910 to 1939. What's the story? Well, it's time for a little history lesson, because those who don't learn from history are doomed to repeat it. Those who don't learn from history are doomed to get an Underground line to Southend. Actually, that doesn't sound so bad, but you're getting a history lesson anyway. While the District line had a service to Southend, the line to Southend is not actually an Underground line. It was built by a company called the London, Tilbury and Southend Railway. By the 19th century, Southend had become a fashionable seaside resort. Visitors from London typically arrived by steamer, but this was not without its drawbacks. Before Southend Pier was built, it was impossible for ships to dock at low tide, and travelling by land was too slow and uncomfortable to be practical. There were plans to build a proper pier, but one way or another they kept getting knocked back. In 1835 a railway was proposed, but by the 1840s the closest you could get by train was Brentwood. Bradshaw's Guide recommended that the best way to get to Southend by rail was to go to London Bridge and get a steamer. The London, Tilbury and Southend Railway, often just called the Tilbury, began as a joint venture between the London and Blackwall Railway and the Eastern Counties Railway. Not only would they run trains to the coast, but also their own steamers to allow passengers to cross the river. So they would be able to serve such destinations as Southend, Gravesend, Rocherville and Tilbury. But it wasn't just passenger traffic they were after. They saw Thames Haven as a potential new port with associated goods trains, but that never really took off as hoped. Their London terminus was Fenchurch Street, owned by the London and Blackwall. The Southend end was to be on the seafront, but following protests by locals it was built in its current location. The first trains ran into Southend in 1855. The line made a significant amount of traffic from holiday makers, excursionists and day trippers. Outside of the rush hour, the line wasn't very heavily used on weekdays. Other railways wanted a slice of the pie, and the District could offer the Tilbury line something in return. Fenchurch Street was not a fantastic terminus as termini went. It was cramped and not ideally suited for heavy traffic, especially given that the Tilbury were already sharing it. They also had terrible problems with fog. Meanwhile, the District Railway had the capacity for extra trains. In fact, they welcomed them. As I've mentioned in previous videos, the District was a company that didn't have a lot of money, so they were always happy to let other railways use their lines. For a fee, of course. So the two railways came to an arrangement. The Tilbury could use the District, and the District could run trains along the Tilbury. One problem. The District terminated at Whitechapel, at a station called St Mary's. This station was only a very short distance from the current Aldgate East, about here. So they built a new railway, the Whitechapel and Bow, that would run from St Mary's and connect with the Tilbury line near Bromley. You can see the gradient leading up to the Tilbury line just beyond the end of the platforms at Bow Road there. It opened in 1902 and of course still exists today as part of the District line, if this footage didn't make that obvious. In 1905 the line was electrified as far as Barking, and in 1932 as far as Upminster. You can see plenty of evidence of the old London, Tilbury and Southend Railway at the stations along the route. Several stations incorporate the LTSR monogram into their ironwork. You can still sit on Tilbury line benches. At East Ham there's an old water tower for steam locomotives. and many stations include abandoned platforms where the Tilbury trains used to stop before these services were taken over by the district entirely. Here at Hornchurch, there are benches made by the Midland Railway, which bought the Tilbury line out in 1912. So, with all the infrastructure in place, the district was able to run trains all the way from Ealing Broadway to Southend. These were hauled by electric locomotives as far as Barking, where these would be swapped out for one of the Tilbury's tank engines. Initially this changeover happened at East Ham, which might be why it was a convenient spot for a water tower, but that's just a guess on my part. The service to Southend was an express train, missing various stations along the way and being non-stop between Barking and Leigh-on-Sea. In 1933 the district was taken over by London Transport, and in 1939 the service to Southend was withdrawn. I must admit I've not been able to find out exactly why, whether the service was uneconomical or whether London Transport just thought it wasn't their job to run seaside excursions. Some maps from the early 1940s do show stations beyond Upminster, but whether that indicated an intention to resume services after the war is unknown. By 1945, the district definitely ended at Upminster, and so it would remain. Of course, you can still get a train over the old Tilbury line to Southend, but if you want to get to Ealing Broadway, I'm afraid you're going to have to change. Hello all, I hope you enjoyed this coastal tale from the tube. If you did, then please do hit like, share, subscribe for more, all the usual shill. Do you have any theories as to why the service was withdrawn? Should it have been withdrawn? Let me know in the comments section below, and I'll see you very soon for another tale from the tube.